You wanted it, so now you've got it. This is the second installment of Gearhead images you may have seen but might not know the full background of. Now, loads of you saw the first video and fired suggestions at me for the second one, and I saw all of them and ignored almost all of them. Look, not forever. I'll get to most of those photos you want me to post and put in these videos, but I'm not going to do it right now. I really want these to be a lot of images that people have maybe never seen and never knew that such craziness happened or what the background story of them is. Eventually, those very well-known images that some people have seen but don't really know the full story of, they'll make the cut. But for the time being, I want to keep this a little bit more interesting, a little bit more weird, a little bit more unique. And trust me when I tell you that my collection of images ranges into the thousands, if not tens of thousands, so this can go on for a while. Also, trust me when I tell you that I have plenty more normal long-form research videos on the way. This is a fun format, and I will revisit it, but this format's not going to supplant the heavy research stuff that many of you have become accustomed to on this channel. It is the stuff that I really enjoy investing myself in making, and thankfully many of you have found it to be enjoyable to watch as well. So, like the last time, these are real images, real facts, and I am a real human being bringing it to you. Authenticity with some, well, mild authority, I hope. Sit back, relax, and let's take a trip through more than 100 years of interesting, awesome, and strange Gearhead history. Minnesota State Fair, 1960. This 1957 Ford truck has reached cruising altitude much to the relief of the elephant and his trainer. As part of the Ott Swenson Thrillcade, crowds were wowed by all kinds of stunts, but the elephant jump in a pickup truck was always a big closer. Note the packed house. Swenson was the type of guy you'd expect to run his own thrill show. His life was full of hustle and adventure. He founded a flying circus in the 1920s, was a racer of cars, a pilot instructor in World War II, and started a thrillcade in the 1950s, first teaming up with Kaiser Frazier, but then in 1952 he hooked up with Ford and featured their cars for years. During an era before CGI and special effects where stunt drivers were superheroes to kids and adults, these machines and their drivers were dominating acts at state fairs. People like Joey Chitwood and others performed around the country. Now the elephant, well, he was likely at the end of his circus life, and being that his only real job requirement was to stand still, this seemed like decent work, assuming the truck hit the ramp at the proper speed. I have no idea who was driving in this image, but Swenson was likely out back counting the money. Interestingly, I once hosted a burnout contest in autocross in the exact same spot where this jump is taking place during the Carcraft Summer Nationals at the Minnesota State Fairgrounds. Here's Italian race driver Paul Sartori in 1906. That's over 1,200 cubic inches of Fiat engine in front of him. The car made 250 horsepower and was built to break the existing land speed record at the time, which was about 120 miles per hour. The car was turned loose on the sands of Ormond Beach, Florida, was a massive failure, and was scrapped shortly after its land speed attempt. $19,000 of 1906 money down the hole, which is way, way more than $500,000 today. It's the 1970s, it's Seattle, Washington, and this is Ed the Ace McCulloch teaching Gordon Mineo a lesson in manners at the top end of the drag strip after a particular run. Before the cars launched off, Ace's team apparently used Mineo's air tank at the starting line to help juice up the tires. This led to a slight disagreement at the starting line, which turned into the fisticuffs you see at the finish line. The one thing we do know is this: Ed may have only had a glancing blow the first time he swung at Mineo, but this photo captures the second time, and he landed square. Big, ugly, and slow. Perhaps my three favorite things on the planet, all captured in this one image of the Hornsby steam crawler. The significance of this machine is pretty simple. The Hornsby company actually invented the chain track you see here. Now, the company was foundering in about 1911, and it sold the rights to its design to Holt, which then merged with the Best Company and formed Caterpillar, which of course became famous for making Caterpillar tractors with the same style of tracks you see here. The next time you see a bulldozer, remember this: the technology came around more than 100 years ago. In 1979, Kenny Reese, a well-known circle track chassis builder, created perhaps the wildest supermodified of all time. This was a real thing. The rule stated that the car had to have 4 wheels, not where they actually had to be. 1 wheel on the left, 3 on the right, and an 850 horsepower injected big block making it all work. Guess what? It worked very well. Tim Richmond tested this machine, loved it, and ran 200 at the Goodyear Test Oval on 3 wheels on one side and 1 on the other. The result? The machine was banned before it ever turned a wheel in a competitive race. One of the most radical race cars ever, and a lot of unrealized potential in the mix. Here's one for you. Who remembers the Super Trike? 1,000 horsepower of insanity right here for all of us to look at. In its ultimate form, the Super Trike ended up with a 426 Hemi by the time it was done. Built by Michigan's Rich Cummings, the machine had a pair of 66-inch tall tires in the back and a single 48-inch tall tire in the front. It was designed to rip wheelies and wow the crowds at drag strips, truck events, and tractor pulls across the country. Cummings retired and went four-wheel monster truck racing in the 1980s. Take a look at the exhaust. It was over 120 feet total of stainless steel tubing to wrap it up the fenders and out the back. This thing truly was an act you had to see to believe. Hey, check it out, a Texas doodlebug. A small fleet of these trucks were commissioned by the oil company Texaco in the early 1930s, and they stand as some of the coolest rigs ever built. Using a Diamond T chassis and hand-built bodies by Heil, they really are amazing. The trucks are 26 feet long, carried 1,500 gallons of fuel, and amazingly stood only 4 inches taller than a Ford Model A. Norman Bell Geddes was the lead designer for this project. With elements like the compound curve windshield, the trucks incorporated things that would not appear in mass-produced vehicles for decades. They truly are stunning. Short, squat, and a perfect mix of both art and practicality. They certainly don't make stuff like they used to. Perhaps one of the most infamous vehicles built in the history of the 20th century, it was known as the Penguin. This massive machine was built in 1939 for the exploration of Antarctica. It cost more than $150,000 then, so more than $3 million now. Weighing 75,000 pounds, rolling on 10-foot-tall Goodyear tires, and packing a pair of monster Cummins engines that powered the electric traction motors at each wheel, the thing had a top speed of 30 miles per hour. Constructed in Illinois, it was incredibly driven on public roads to Boston, Massachusetts, where it was loaded on a ship to head to Antarctica. The monster was a massive failure. The slick tires are ineffective, the gargantuan beast broke through the very ramps that were used to offload it from the ship, and it achieved none of its stated goals. World War II broke out and the crew abandoned ship and headed for home. The Penguin was rediscovered in 1958, encased in ice. It's never been seen again. Standing 12 feet tall, 55 feet long, and 19 feet wide, it was the largest land vehicle ever built at that point. It carried 2,500 gallons of diesel and sipped it, getting 2 miles per gallon. Speaking of weird things designed to drive on ice, things could be better for the crew of this 1957 Tucker snowcat, right? This photo was taken during the successful 2,158-mile Commonwealth Trans-Antarctic expedition led by Sir Vivian Fuchs in 1957. The trip took 100 days. These Tucker snowcats had 180 horsepower Chrysler engines, and as you can see, 4 pontoon-like tracks per truck. 4 of the Tuckers started the trip, and they all made it. Even this one, which was trying to fall into the depths of a crevasse. Weighing about 8,000 pounds, traveling at a top speed of 16 miles per hour, and spanning more than 20 feet in length, the snowcat trucks were the right tools for the job, but it had to have been one hellish trip. You have undoubtedly seen what appears to be one of the most dangerous drag racing machines ever built, but do you know anything about it? This is the legendary Jade Warrior top fuel motorcycle with its builder and rider Angus MacPhail at the tiller. Using a blown nitro-burning 4-cylinder Cosworth engine, this baby went 200 plus on the regular. There was a little scooter tire in the front and a top fuel motorcycle slick in the back. MacPhail ran the bike for years in Europe without a single incident, winning many, many races along the way. There were no rules regarding the rider position at this time in history for European drag bike racing, so MacPhail took this route, and while it looks insane and halfway suicidal, it was highly successful. The major question, though, would you ride it? This Don Cormier photo led the LA Times sports section after Sunday at the 1969 NHRA Winter Nationals. You're seeing the fury that Larry Reyes survived in the Hawaiian funny car after the machine spun around in the lights at 181 miles per hour, took flight, and violently wrecked. The brand new car was not behaving during qualifying, and as he won the first round of competition, this happened. The large, full-size Charger-bodied Hawaiian took flight, and there was nothing left of it when the dust settled. Car owner Roland Leong replaced the machine post-haste, and the two men hit the ground running and winning. It was a rough start to their time together, but they moved past it quickly, started beating the best cars in the country, and they remained close friends until the end of Leong's life. The Logie chassis protected Reyes, but the car was decimated. This is a truly amazing photo. The California Sand Drags, circa 1967. I love this photo for about a million reasons. First, we have the driver in the sandrail wearing a fully aluminized fire suit and sneakers. We have the minimalist construction of the sandrail, and then we have the engine. And it's not a Chrysler Hemi. This is actually a Pontiac with Mickey Thompson Hemi heads on it, heads so rare that they only made about 20 sets of them. This engine came out of an asphalt drag race car and went into the sandrail. Now, the thing had to have been mental to drive. It looks like the dude just stabbed the gas in this photo. No rooster tails yet, but some action is starting and the sand is about ready to fly. But as you can note, the butterflies on the injector are wide open. The second time I'm going to ask you in this video, do you want to drive it? No, this is not a cast-off from the set of Mad Max. This is a Winther rotary snowplow truck from the early 1900s, and it represents the baddest snow-moving son of a gun available on planet Earth at the time. The truck had two engines, a mill in the back to move the machine, and then a massive Wisconsin T-head engine to spin the rotary plow. The engine that spun the plow was at least 600 cubic inches, likely closer to 800 or 900. The whole thing kind of looks primeval with the spiked tires and the massive impeller on the plow, which we would now mostly refer to as a snow blower or snow thrower, back then was known most commonly as a rotary plow. These trucks were four-wheel drive and commanded top dollar in their day. The Winther company was around through the 19-teens and into the 1920s, but it was actually sold off in 1927. Now, I know a lot of you want to get into really fast race car stuff, but for me, I would love to pull the levers and stab the gas into this thing. Yep, this is big. Behold the LeTourneau TC497 Overland Train Mark II. This 572-foot-long machine had 4,000 horsepower up front of the control car with a couple of turbine engines, and as much as you wanted to add with more power cars in the back. Each of these individual cars had steerable wheels that were controlled off the front control car. Now, this helped negotiate different things in hard terrain, cornering, and all the like. The cab was more than 20 feet tall. 6 guys could live in it with a galley, beds, and a bathroom. The thing on top of the cab? It had radar. Of course, it had radar as well. The rig could carry almost 500,000 pounds of cargo at 20 miles per hour on flat ground. Now, the standard range was 400-ish miles, but fuel cars could be added for additional capacity. The machine was debuted in 1962 after being approved in 1960 and built in 1961. Shipped to the Army's Yuma, Arizona testing ground, it was evaluated for a few years before being abandoned. The intended use was to deliver supplies and materials to areas where there were no roads to get to, like, radar installations and other harsh environments. Now, it never got the chance. Big helicopters could do the work of this monster way cheaper and way easier, and of course, way faster. In 1969, the whole unit was sold for scrap, all except for the cab, which is still apparently in Yuma today. This was an incredible experiment that never went anywhere. Okay, it might have gone somewhere if you've ever seen the Arctic land trains, but that may be another photo for another day. Devastation in its highest form. This incredible photo was captured on October 30th, 1999, and it represents not just an amazingly destroyed engine, but the violent end of a drag racer's career. Eddie Hill was on the wrong end of this one. Using a cast block that was, unknown to him, defective, the entire engine came apart like it was made of papier-mâché far down the racetrack. The explosion was so violent, so absolutely titanic, that its concussion forced Eddie Hill forward and down into his seat. His helmet had marks on it from bouncing off the butterfly steering wheel, but his back got the worst of it. Hill was quoted as saying that he thought a piece of chassis tubing had actually pierced him from behind. In fact, he was suffering from crushed vertebrae. The pain was so horrific that he had asked officials to cut him out of his race car, and they did. Eddie Hill never got into another Top Fuel car after that day, and cast blocks were shortly thereafter disallowed from use in Top Fuel. The most incredible footnote? This wasn't triggered by a backfire, a broken crank, or anything of that nature. The entire block literally broke itself in half like a massive hunk of peanut brittle. I did mention the fact that I like things that are big and ugly, right? Okay, good. Because this is the 1951 Dart Model 75-TA dump truck, which at the time was the largest dump truck ever built, and it was the only one the company ever sold. Used at the Baghdad copper mine in Arizona, it chuffed along for years. Designed by a guy named Ralph Kress, who is basically the godfather of off-highway dump trucks, This particular design catapulted his career and saw him eventually working for every major builder of this style of equipment like Caterpillar and others. So what are we looking at? This truck was capable of hauling 75 tons of anything you wanted at a whack. Kind of quaint by today's standards, but back in 1951, that was crazy. Power came from two massive supercharged Buta diesel engines, each rated at about 300 horsepower. The bore in these things was 6 3/4 inches, and the stroke a stunning 8 3/4 inches. They spun the engines to a maximum of 1,200 RPM. The engines drove the wheels, unlike later trucks that used the engines to make electricity that then would drive the wheels. The dual tires are really cool looking, and the craziest thing is, this machine had leaf springs. Reportedly, the custom springs used leaves up to 2 inches thick in the packs. The curb weight of the truck itself was some 60 tons unloaded. Where is it now? Smelted and smelted again over the decades, I'm sure. Turned into everything from forks to tin cans to who knows what. A cool machine that made a career and made a mine in Arizona loads of money over the decades. They called it the Blitzen Benz. In the early 1900s, it was the baddest son of a gun on 4 wheels. Mercedes-Benz had built a hot rod that was about a half a century before the term was even invented. Taking the most advanced racing chassis they had and jabbing a 1,312 cubic inch 4-cylinder in the nose that made 200 horsepower, the world's first hypercar was created. The 3,100-pound monster was chain-driven and did things that no other automobile had done and sent human beings to speeds that civilization at that point didn't believe possible on the ground. 16 feet long, 5 feet wide, and using a 4-speed manual transmission, the Blitzen Benz became a sensation wherever it went. Drivers like Barney Oldfield, Bob Berman, and others set records with the machine and performed in front of massive crowds. In this photo, we see Barney Oldfield hammer down on a horse track throwing dirt and smoke at full throttle. Bob Berman drove the car to its ultimate glory in 1911 when he went 141 miles per hour on Ormond Beach in Florida. That made the Blitzen Benz the fastest thing on Earth, literally. No airplane, train, boat, or other measured thing had ever achieved that speed. He knocked off the V8 motorcycle of Glenn Curtis to take that honor. 2 of these cars survive, one owned by an American collector, the other owned by Benz. 1982. After battling failing brakes all day, Dale Earnhardt runs out of luck. The brakes, completely shot, fail him totally, and he makes hard contact with the rear of Tim Richmond's car in turn 1. Richmond slides away and is damaged, but Earnhardt's car is destroyed, flipping over its speed and mashing the wall. The car, upside down, is bleeding every fluid known to man, and for more than a minute, Dale Earnhardt is inside it. And then, he slinks out of its tattered remains. Here's where the legend stuff kicks in. Hobbled by what was later discovered to be a broken leg, Earnhardt is helped down the track by Richmond himself, and he hops, literally, into the front seat of the ambulance. Why? Well, he knew if he got in the back, he would never be cleared to race the next week by officials. So they dropped him off at the pits, said he was fine, he refused to see a doctor, and he kept his injury secret from NASCAR. He raced the following event. This could be the weirdest story, but also my favorite story yet. You're looking at the Protector, a submarine built by Simon Lake's Lake Torpedo Boat Company in 1902 with the intent on selling many of them to the U.S. government to add to the naval fleet. Simon Lake was a brilliant man who had a huge influence on submarine design. Unfortunately for him, at this time in history, this particular submarine was bizarre as compared to the Holland-class subs that the U.S. Navy was using. Because of that, the U.S. Navy really wasn't that interested in this particular design at this time in history, but you'll never guess who was. Japan and Russia. See, in 1904 and 1905, those guys get into a tiff which resulted in the Russo-Japanese War. And there were no rules back then about who you could sell what to in terms of war material, and so the Russians anteed up and got the first Protector. The submarine was loaded onto a big cargo ship and sent over to St. Petersburg. Now this is where the story gets good because the Russians wanted this bad boy on the other side of their massive country as quickly as possible, so they devised a plan. They built a couple of heavy-duty rail cars and craned that baby behind a sturdy locomotive and sent it 6,000 miles via rail to Vladivostok. Bridges had to be beefed up and tunnels had to be modified to make this happen. The Russians now had a submarine they could harass Japanese ships with. They liked it so much they bought 5 more. These things could dive to 100 feet, move at 4.5 knots underwater. They actually had retractable wheels so they could be lowered like landing gear so the sub could actually drive along the bottom of shallow seas. It weighed 187 tons, 12 guys manned it, 3 torpedo tubes made it dangerous, and it was 72 feet long. Power? that came from 4 engines that made a total of about 400 horses. It served with others in its class until 1913. This is crazy, right? The 1980s were wild, man. That's a speed skier on top of a streamliner. His name is Sean Cridland, and he's on top of Rick Vesco's car at Bonneville in 1985. Cridland was setting a new, quote, car top record of 163 miles an hour on that fateful day, and Vesco was at the wheel. Now, speed skiers use car top runs to work on their aerodynamics, their tuck, and to concentrate on making them as small as possible to thwart the effects of air. Now, I'm not sure how he was affixed to the top of the car, but clearly it actually worked, and Cridland wasn't the only one doing this. Female skier Kristen Culver set the women's record on the same day, and apparently both of those records still stand, and frankly, may never be broken. The whole thing looks like something out of a weird comic book, at least it does in my opinion, but both Cridland and Culver managed to set their own records and climb off the top of their own respective race cars on that day at Bonneville. There's another 20 photos, another 20 stories, another 20 glimpses into history from submarines to people on top of streamliners to dump trucks to drag racing to fisticuffs and more. There is so much to explore, so much to learn, and so much to be enthralled with in the hot rodding history, the mechanical history, and the world that surrounds us. I'm Brian Loans. Thanks for watching. We'll be back soon with more fun Gearhead history, and next time we're going to dive deep into some of the things you've always wanted to know about. Oh yeah, do me a solid. Like and subscribe, would you?